All right, if you would introduce yourself to the vast audience that we have.
Okay. Well, I'm Brien Thorstenberg. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Liberia, West Africa from 1985 to 1987.
Okay. Now, would you tell us what you were doing just before that?
Okay. Well, I had worked for a retail chain. There was an Oklahoma chain in retail management. I was kind of in a management program for about 3 years in the Oklahoma City area. I'm a graduate of Oklahoma State University, and for the most part of my life, I've lived in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also said that lifestyle didn't suit you very well.
It wasn't so much
about the retail management.
Well, I think just in general, it wasn't so much the lifestyle. It was just, I didn't really feel as challenged as I could be. I mean, it was a good job, paid pretty decently, various things like that, but it just wasn't fulfilling, I think is about the best way to say it.
What did you have your degree in?
So I double majored in economics and management as a BS in business administration.
What did you see yourself doing with degrees like that?
Business, basically. Not
necessarily. For a big corporation?
No, not necessarily. I think there were some thoughts of that, like when I was in college, but I think afterwards, more from a standpoint of nonprofit management, but using those principles to run successful organizations or to be in successful organizations.
Okay. And you came to a point where it wasn't fulfilling, you said.
Yeah, and the economy in Oklahoma was bad, and it just looked like a good opportunity for a change.
And when was this? In the mid-'80s?
Yeah. So I think the realization or my thought process really started in late 84 to early 85.
Okay. And that thought process evolved?
Yeah. So
due to what?
Several things. For one of them, and obviously we're talking about the Peace Corps. I thought about joining the Peace Corps for a long period of time. I seriously considered it when I was graduating from college, but it just, I don't know, I think a little bit was my courage. My parents weren't necessarily for it, various things along those lines. And so I think maybe the courage was the biggest thing at that point in time. From a standpoint of just a bunch of different factors, not necessarily feeling fulfilled, wanting to look for something more. One of the things that was really happening throughout the world at this time and was getting a lot of publicity was that there was a massive famine in East Africa, in Africa, primarily in Ethiopia, but a lot of world attention was brought to it. From a political standpoint, like with the U.S. government, with other world governments, and then the pop music culture really kind of took it on as well. There was a gentleman named Bob Geldof, and he founded this movement called forget the name of it now. I keep forgetting the name of it. But anyway, they developed a song that the proceeds from this went to the Aid for Africa. And so with that, it was called Do They Know It's Christmas? And it came out in the Christmas time of 1984. And all these incredible British singers, it was a British movement. Bob Geldof had, like Paul McCartney, the person from Wham, Elton John, all these various artists, and it became a huge hit. Beyond being a big hit, it really brought a lot of effort, or a lot of aid, and a lot of attention to what was going on in Africa. And so with that, United States type musicians did USA for Africa, and they did a song,
We Are the World.
We Are the World, yes.
Lionel Richie.
And Michael Jackson wrote the song, but you had all kinds of people from Bob Dylan to Bruce Springsteen, pretty much anybody's famous, same kind of on the...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I saw it recently.
Yeah. And one of the things with that, and I mentioned Bob Geldof, his efforts, he was with the Boomtown Rats, which was a British kind of group, but But anyway, and he kind of ruined his musical career of this because he really took on the effort of Aid for Africa. And he won if I'm not mistaken, in 1985 or 1986, he won the Nobel Peace Prize for this. And yeah, I'm pretty sure it was a Nobel Prize, and I'm pretty sure it was a Nobel Peace Prize. And so, but anyway, it brought a lot of attention, and so kind of brought back, I would like to do something more fulfilling, kind of brought back the thought of the Peace Corps.
So would you say that was kind of the romanticism of the whole thing, because it was music and all these stars?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it was the romanticism of it. I mean, going back to, like when I was in college and everything, I knew a lot about the Peace Corps. From a standpoint of like reading about the Kennedy administration, reading about a lot of the politics of the 1960s, the formulation of the Peace Corps, various things like that. When I say the Kennedy administration, everybody thinks I'm a big John Kennedy fan. And, I thought he was a decent president. I mean, he wasn't in long enough to really evaluate him. But it was really his brother, Robert Kennedy, that really stirred my interest. And kind of going back to my interest in the Peace Corps, he made a speech in 1966 in South Africa. It's called the Day of Affirmation speech. And one of the key passages of this, and in his book, To Seek a New World, he kind of expands on that a little bit and talks about, very briefly, like a Peace Corps volunteer. But the passage is something to the effect of, each time, and it's a little sexist statement, each time a man, humanity, but anyway, each time a person stands up for a principle or ideal, they set forth a tiny ripple of hope. And this ripple of hope, comprised with other hopes, can create a massive wave that will sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression, of resistance and oppression. And then he goes on to talks about several examples, and one was like a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa. And just, one of the expressions that he had during his campaign, and really even before his campaign, before he was assassinated, was individuals can make a difference. And from that standpoint, it kind of, the little ripple of hope that if I was a Peace Corps volunteer, I could be doing, especially in Africa, if I could be doing something to make it maybe a little bit better, not necessarily noticed, but more so than I was doing, working in retail management.
Did you say especially Africa because that's where the famine was going on?
Yeah, that's where the focus of world attention and needing help was, in Africa.
Yeah. Did you think at all at that time about if you go there and try to help live there, you got to learn the language? What in the world is that language? Anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a detriment. I mean, I knew that would have to be. I'd have to learn about the country, various things like that.
Sure.
I also learned, during the application process of the Peace Corps, because it was pretty extensive, that, they brought out a lot of that in terms of attention. But one of the things about Africa that a misconception in the United States is it's kind of like Africa as a whole. And it's not, so first of all, I think that there are 48 countries there, but anyway, there's so many different countries. And even within each country, there's so many different tribes, and so many languages. And so there isn't a one case or one language or one culture that you would be learning. So yeah. But I didn't know much about Africa until, just the whole process of the Peace Corps.
So when did you apply?
So I got pretty lucky in a lot of ways. So I applied in the beginning of April of 1985. And one of the things about it is that the average time span for being applied, getting accepted, and getting put into training was anywhere from a year to a year and a half. And and some of this was with the help of my recruiter, but I just kind of flew through, because I think it was the first week of April that I applied, and I was actually landed for training at Auburn University, I think it was July 10th, and it was like the first part of July, yeah. So just kind of hitting different boundaries.
And you think maybe your recruiter facilitated your passage?
Yeah, and the reason why I say that, not like giving me any special privilege, but we seem to have a good rapport. So my background is in business, because this actually comes up fairly significant in a lot of my experience with the Peace Corps. But anyway, you know, different programs came in at different times in different countries and various things like that. And if I would have stayed with business development, it would have probably been a year or so before I would get into the Peace Corps. She suggested inland fisheries, which I don't have a science background, agriculture extension background.
You didn't know the first thing about it, did you?
Yeah.
Inland fisheries?
Inland fisheries, but the concept, and it made sense, and it was, you know, in some ways true, that the whole standpoint was not just growing the fish, but basically the business aspect of where farmers can make money on it and develop anything beyond a subsistence level of existence. And so that's what attracted me, and that's what I agreed to that, and I got accepted by that, etc. Yeah. And so I mentioned I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Liberia. Well, I got accepted to go to Tanzania, and we'll get into that a little bit later.
Okay. When I read your essay, I again was struck by your adulation for the training program at Auburn.
Yes.
And I would like you to tell us all about that.
Yeah.
Because we all had different training experiences. Mm-hmm. Yours sounds really different to me.
Yeah, so inland fisheries, the training in itself was, so like a lot of the basic Peace Corps training, like if you're going into education or business or various things like that, you meet someplace in the United States for like 3 days, and then you would go over to the country and be in a 8 to 10 week training program. In inland fisheries, it was a 10-week training program in the States, pretty much specifically on technical aspects of it, of inland fisheries. Mm-hmm. And then we would go in for, I think it was 10 weeks in Liberia before we were actually put into our site. So the thing about the training in Auburn that has to be brought up, because it kind of gets into going to Liberia and various things like that, but right. The University of Oklahoma had the inland fisheries training. And my understanding was they double booked on 2 trainings, one going to Liberia and one going to Tanzania. Mm. And so they got with Auburn, and I feel very fortunate on this because the training was so good. But anyway, in the Oklahoma people, I'll get into that later, and I'm from Oklahoma, so I don't want to get too much into bashing. But anyway, Auburn was noted as the best university or the best research coming out in inland fisheries in the world. Okay. And all these scientists, especially from Israel, which at the time in the mid-'80s was really known for its fisheries, kind of being on the cutting edge, they would send their scientists there and everything like that. We had the full backing of the university. To give you an idea, like a lot of schools, in Oklahoma schools and everything, like your inland fisheries department's in a building. At Auburn, it was in a 5-story building that was specifically, the name of the building was the Department of Inland Fisheries and Allied Aquaculture.
Huge.
Yeah, and it was cool. And we were treated like celebrities, and you know, at Auburn, and you know, we had a professor that was running our training. We had a PhD that was just awarded the a Fulbright scholarship or Fulbright program, yeah. And then a PhD candidate and a master's candidate, all in inland fisheries, all former Peace Corps volunteers. And there were several Peace Corps returned Peace Corps volunteers in the faculty of the program.
Fisheries?
Yes,
Oh, wow.
In agriculture as well. And the fishery station that they had was incredible. And again, we were literally treated so well. They played a lot of mind games with us, and it was tough at times, but everything seemed to have a purpose.
what is an example of the mind games they would play on you? And why do you think they would do that?
They were doing that. I'll kind of skip to the latter part of the question. They were doing that as basic that they felt that that those types of exercises would give us skills that would help us survive, and not survive so much, well, both physically and mentally, but being able to last 2 years. So there's 2 programs that I feel were really instrumental in my time in Liberia for 2 years. I'm trying to think of the order that these went in. So one was, when I mentioned this to you before, and that was, so we were each given a pond, and that was incredible, because here's this world-class research facility, and we each had our own pond. And we
How big was the pond?
I want to say it was about 100 meters.
In diameter?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think it was like, it wasn't a square, I want to maybe say like 20 by 40, something like that. I knew it one time, and I should have looked it up, but anyway, so we were responsible for that pond. And
it's a big hole in the ground with water.
Well, it's a rectangle, and yeah, and we controlled the water source and various things like that. It had it to where there couldn't be erosion, at least on the sides. This was something that, next to me was a PhD from Israel, in their pond. On the other side was another volunteer, because we were kind of spread out through the pond. But we were responsible for, during the time that we were there, for raising a crop of tilapia. And the significance of tilapia at the time, now it's widely known, but at the time in the U.S. it wasn't known at all.
I'm sure I'd never heard of it back then.
Yeah, and the reason why tilapia is, it's a very hardy fish, and it's very adaptable in third world situations, from the standpoint that it doesn't rely on external feed. You can develop a phytoplankton bloom that they can feed off of, and so, and also in terms of temperature variations, dissolved oxygen variations, they're very hardy, as opposed to catfish. Catfish is a great example, and it was being raised in Alabama and Mississippi. That's kind of the primary areas, especially Mississippi. But it requires external feed. Well, that wouldn't be appropriate in a third world, situation, because they don't have the ability to do that.
Yeah.
Well, and even if they could they afford it?
Yeah.
But anyway, so we had to do pond management, basically weekly requisitions, weekly management plans for that pond. And so I did that, we all did that. We're going tilapia. So on my pond, I put that to develop a phytoplankton bloom, I would develop a cage that would be overlooking the water, and I would need things like barbed wire and plywood and 2x4s, etc., in order to build this on the pond. And so there would be where there would be kind of holes and stuff to where the manure would fall into the water and develop a phytoplankton bloom, kind of like a compost analytical from a standpoint of that way. And so anyway, I needed the wood, and so I said that I would dig these post hole holes so deep, by the end of the week, which was Saturday. And then Monday I would get the supplies that I would need to buy that. Or not to buy that, well, to buy that, or they would buy it for me and then bring it to the pond.
Yeah.
So on Saturday I'm digging these post hole covers, because that was the only time I could really, our training was so regimented in terms of things that we did and things like that. But anyway, I'm digging the post holes. Well, a hurricane was hitting the Gulf Coast of Alabama at that time. And Auburn's about 200 miles to the north of there, but it was raining sideways. And I mean, I'm out there just totally drenched, everything, digging these post hole covers, a lot of times water splashing out. So the van that took us to and from the campus to the fishery station, because there was a difference, several miles. Well, anyway, they say, come on in, you need to get out of the storm. And I'm like, well, I've got to finish this today, or I, won't get it. And they said, don't worry about that. This is a hurricane. This is a hurricane.
Yeah.
I mean, it was raining so hard, it was raining sideways. So okay, so I did that. So Monday comes, and I came for my supplies, and they said, you didn't finish your management plan. And I said, yeah. And I said, well, you told me I didn't have to. They said, well, we lied. And so anyway, and I wasn't going to be able to meet my management plan. I don't know what would have happened, but anyway, I wasn't going to meet it. And actually, another volunteer gave me this idea, but they had a tool shed. And they had those types of supplies in the tool shed. So I stole them. And got was able to fulfill my management plan. And so, we had evaluations. I don't know if it's weekly or I think it was every other week. But anyway, in that they said what I did was really good because I was able to deal with adversity and overcome it, but what did I learn? And I said, what I learned was I'm going to be lied to a lot, and I need to develop contingency plans for when I'm lied to in order to still get what I need to get done. And they said, yo, you got it. So another one, and this was a lot of fun in a lot of ways, but our group was taken to western Alabama, and so it was a couple hundred miles or however wide the state was, almost to the Mississippi border, and we were divided into groups of 4. I think it was either 4 or 5, but anyway, we were divided in individual groups, and we each had a van and we each had a driver, and the driver was one of the trainers or somebody with Auburn, and they would only do exactly what we told them to do. And they basically said, so we get to this hotel, it's one of those old motor hotels, and has a restaurant, attached to it, which is kind of significant to this story. So anyway, we would meet, so there was another professor who wasn't part of our training, but he was from Auburn. He was a Peace Corps volunteer. Is either in the 2nd or 3rd group of the Peace Corps, like in 1961, or 62. Wow. And anyway, so he kind of was a facilitator of this exercise, and they wouldn't tell us what it was. We had to figure that out, but there'd be a little bit of prodding and everything like that.
I like that.
But we didn't know what it was. And then one of the things in our first night, we're sitting in his hotel room, and all of us. I think there were 15 of us, somewhere in that neighborhood, and maybe it was 16 because that would have been divided into 4s real well.
Yeah.
But anyway, he's kind of talking and kind of giving maybe little hints, but just what would be going on. This was a Thursday night, and what would be going on to the next, Sunday afternoon. And anyway, in the middle of this, he made this comment about, did you guys have supper here? And he said yes. And I was like, oh, what was the special tonight? Because it's a pretty good restaurant. And said catfish. Anyway, there's something that clued into me. I feel like this Rain Man quality. Well, anyway, so we finished up and everybody just sat around drinking beer. I shot to the restaurant. And I asked to speak to the owner or the manager. And so the owner comes out. And I asked him, where did you get your catfish? Because the guy said, what was special catfish? And he goes, I wonder where they got it. Well, anyway, I clued into that. And so anyway, I went there and asked him where he got his catfish. And he said, I grow them. And he was a catfish farmer, and golly, I don't know how many acres. I think 200 acres worth of water in different ponds. Well, it was a stormy night. And one of the things that's significant, so in Alabama and Mississippi, they would stock the catfish at real high densities. And so when it's a stormy night, the dissolved oxygen in the water is disappearing. So basically, I know it sounds kind of crazy, but the fish can suffocate. So you have to aerate it. Well, anyway, I'm talking, he goes, I'm going to have to be out all night aerating my ponds. You want to come with me? And I said, sure. So I pulled an all-nighter with him, and we went around to the ponds and everything, and he taught me a lot. And and then one thing that was great because of this. Totally kind of unrelated, but it was a great experience for me. So anyway, we're talking, and we're both huge college football fans. So we're talking a lot about college football, and I know a lot about it, at least from a historical standpoint, maybe not from a strategic so much, other than, like your typical fan. Anyway, we're talking, and so at the end of the night, or in the early morning, he goes, because he knew that we were at Auburn, and he goes, would you like to go to the Auburn football practice session? And I said, and he goes, they open on Monday. And I said, I know, but it's a closed session. They don't let anybody in. And he goes, well, my son is the running backs coach, and he can get you in.
Oh.
And so anyway, it just worked out well because our days were always packed, but we had our evaluation on that Monday, and the way mine was scheduled, just by chance, I would be free because the second session was from 4 to 6. And so I got to go to a closed practice session with Auburn, and they were preseason number 1, and I was the only one there that wasn't part of the football program. They kept trying to kick me out, and I have to keep pointing to this assistant. He wasn't going to let me in at first, and I said, well, so-and-so said that you would let me in, and he goes, how did you know him? And I told him the story.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that was a great experience. So
certainly.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, was training, it sounds like...
Could I go back to that really quick?
Go ahead.
So anyway, so with that, we figured out through prods and through our own just kind of a neat thing that what we needed to, what the exercise was, is that we had to develop a development plan in a 2-year period utilizing the resources that we would have as a Peace Corps volunteer.
That's a tall order.
Yeah, without doing it. And so, I don't know, our group we gelled. And I remember going like door to door in the country with some of these Auburn fish farms, knocking on the door, asking, and we all did this, asking them if they could tell me a little bit about their operation. Then they took us downtown at this little town that we were in, and just said, figure things out. So we found City Hall, went and asked if we could speak to the mayor. So we were in about an hour and a half conference with the mayor. The trainer that had a responsibility for us, thought we were lost, didn't know where we were, went into City Hall asking if they'd seen some Peace Corps volunteer trainings, and the person that was at the desk said, yes, they're in conference with the mayor right now. So it was a cool experience, but we figured it out pretty quick. But I think what those two things really taught me was how really kind of on your own you're going to have to figure things out. You're going to get thrown a lot of challenges, and how do you overcome that, and you can't quit, and you know, not being negative and everything like that. It really taught resiliency, and like being lied to, it's like, okay, well, that's unfair, that's not right, but that's life in the third world in a lot of ways. And
right.
So
I'm wondering if it sounds like it was pretty rigorous training.
Yeah, it was.
It's not for everybody, and so was there a segment of people who were there who didn't make it?
Not in that part of the training, no, because you're still in the U.S. and you still have decent living conditions. The training was intense, but it was still in a sense like a game. There was a safety net there. We didn't have anybody drop out of that training. I think the Oklahoma training, which was a whole different mentality, ours was rigorous, but it seemed to have more respect for the individual trainees than what the Oklahoma trainees said when I hooked up with them. And they felt that they were treated in really condescending ways, that they were really kind of hazed and harassed. They just really didn't see, they didn't think, they didn't like the training at all. And some of them talked about possibly having a little bit PTSD from it, and because they were really
Did a bunch
harassed.
of them go home?
Some of them were kicked out, as I understand it. I don't know. I'm in Auburn. They're in Norman.
Yeah. But you met up with them later on, didn't
Yeah.
you? Yeah.
Yeah. So
It sounds like the way you talk about it sounds like an awful experience. And
that's the way.
yours,
That's the way that they talked about it. Yeah, we got frustrated and things like that. A lot of our training, we weren't very quick not to complain, and we kind of turned it into a joke because, like, if anybody complained about anything, it seemed to be thrown back in our face of like, well, if that bothers you, what's going to happen when you get to Africa? And then the way that we kind of turned it into a joke, like if we're eating together and I don't know, somebody's coffee or soup is cold, and they would say something like, "Man, this is cold," and it's like, well, if that bothers you, what's going? We'd all chime in, "What's going to happen when you get to Africa?"
Yeah.
And so we turned it in and we gelled and everything else.
This might be the time for you to tell me, you were headed to Tanzania.
Yeah, Tanzania.
Tanzania, but you didn't go there. What happened?
Okay, so I mentioned that I was a business major, economics and management double major. So I caught on to the fisheries. They thought I was doing really well. And it was all of, our group was doing and everything. And I caught on to it really well. Well, a Tanzania government official came to be with our training group. And a lot of times there's a lot of formality with, the thought processes of people from Africa in terms of, you have to have very specific credentials. It's not really kind of looking beyond black and white type of issues. And I don't mean racial, I just mean, But anyway, so myself and this other guy that didn't have extensive biology or science, I didn't have any biology, I had some science, but in my undergraduate, but we had our visas revoked. And so we didn't even know this was going on, and so the Peace Corps or our trainers felt that we were doing really well and the Peace Corps shouldn't lose us, so we got switched to the Liberian group.
So you didn't measure up academically for the...
Just from the standpoint of the science aspect,
yes.
Yeah. So, but anyway, and this was like right at the end of training. And so we got switched to Oklahoma, but I never went to the Oklahoma training.
Yeah.
Finished up with the Tanzania training, what little bit that there was left. And then I actually met the Liberia group on a plane that was headed to Liberia.
Did you meet them in Oklahoma and then you all went to
Liberia? Kind of. Let me explain. So the Tanzania group was like a week ahead of the Oklahoma group in terms of time. So this other gentleman, his name was Alan. He's from Iowa. He got sent back to Iowa. I got sent back to Oklahoma, which was kind of nice because I got to see the family and everything.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, the plane that I was taking to New York was in Tulsa. They were in Norman. And it kind of sounds crazy at the time, but the whole airline situation was a lot different during the mid-'80s. So they flew from Oklahoma City Airport to Tulsa Airport, picked up Tulsa passengers, and then we flew to JFK in New York City.
Yeah.
So I got on the plane in Tulsa, and they were already on the plane, and that's where I met the group.
Okay.
And that's where I got handed the packet of what I would need and the overview of Liberia. This was day before the internet. This was before, email and all that kind of stuff. So what we needed for Tanzania in a lot of ways was a lot different than what we needed for Liberia. And
you mean in the way of fisheries?
In the way of supplies and what we should. And like one thing. So and Alan was the same way, but he changed to New York, but I didn't. But we were told to go to Tanzania, in suits. And Liberia wasn't that way. And so they're wearing, jeans and T-shirts, and I'm in a gray suit with a tie. And and another thing, and this kind of gets into like the first time that I got sick in Liberia, but we weren't. We were told that they would have bedding for us in Tanzania. Well, see, I didn't have that list of what I needed to Liberia until I'm on the plane to go to Liberia. And so anyway, I didn't have bedding. Neither did Alan, but he did have a sleeping bag because he thought he'd be camping out at times. But I didn't have anything. Well, so, when we got to Liberia, it was a week before the market. It was a weekly market before I could get sheets. So I slept without sheets or any kind of bedding on a mattress. I think I caught pneumonia. We'll get into that later. Because it was during the rainy season and it was real damp. But anyway.
Mm-hmm. All right, so you were in Tanzania about when?
You mean Liberia?
Yeah, yes, sorry. Liberia about when?
1985.
When?
Of the month?
Yeah.
Yeah, September of 1985.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay. And where were you and where was this for more training, in-country training?
Yes.
Okay.
Let me go back to when we landed at the airport because it's pretty significant in terms of what's going on. So we land at the airport and, it's kind of, this one woman kind of summed it up, in terms of like equally terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. But you kind of get hit with this wall of heat and the smells of a third world country, kind of distinct smells. But we go in to kind of the terminal area, and it's not that nice of an airport to begin with in Liberia. But there's like this huge reception, and there's microphones. There's one that I learned, television station in the country, and that's filming us. And the charge d'affaires there, the vice president of the country of Liberia is there, and there's all these officials, and then there's speeches, and they're talking about.
Wow.
Yeah, this is like what's going on, and then they start talking about all the feuding between the two countries and everything. But we're really glad you're here, and we've got all this settled. I can't remember like the exact words, but they were all saying that the charge d'affaires apologized for the U.S. ambassador not being there, but he was out of the country and everything. And they're talking about these disagreements, and we had no idea what was going on. And we're kind of like whispering under our breaths, literally, like, what are they talking about? It's like, and so what had happened was, but nobody bothered to tell us, so there was a lot of political issues going on in Liberia at the time.
Uh-huh.
And the U.S. had accused Liberia of violating human rights violations, and they wanted them to stop, and Liberia evidently didn't. And so the U.S. cut off the aid package to Liberia. And so so this was in the height of the Cold War. And it's kind of funny when you think about from the perspective of Peace Corps volunteer. But anyway, it's the height of the Cold War. So Liberia thinks, well, we'll make the U.S. happy by expelling the Soviet Union mission to Liberia.
Yeah.
And they did. And so the U.S. didn't do anything about it. They didn't appease it. So our visas got revoked. We'll keep the Peace Corps volunteers out of here. And like the U.S. government would care about that.
Yeah.
It's like, oh wow, we want those volunteers in there.
So and, like pawns.
Yeah, we were pawns, and we didn't know it. And anyway, there was a group that wasn't fisheries that came about a week before us, and they were like business development, not education, that was at a different time, but like healthcare, things like that.
Uh-huh.
They actually went to Philadelphia for 3 days before they were going to go to the country. They got sent home. They didn't even know if they'd be going to Liberia, but then they got back into the country like a week before we did. But so they knew about it before they came into the country.
Uh-huh.
We didn't know about it
thing.
at all. So anyway, that was kind of strange. And so we get on a bus, and an associate, I saw somebody walk by. Anyway, an assistant director of Peace Corps got on the bus with us, and we're going, and we hit our first, I call it a military checkpoint, but it's kind of a combination checkpoint with the military and the police. And a soldier, gets on our bus, and the assistant Peace Corps director gives him a piece of paper that has our traveling permissions on it. And the soldier has a rifle and walks up and down the aisle, and it's kind of thinking, well, we're not we're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy. It's yeah. So that was kind of eye opening, and then we get to a training area that's probably about an hour outside of where the airport was. And then that's where we hooked up with that other group. But we still were kind of divided in terms of like our disciplines, and mine, of course, being inland fisheries.
And along with everything else, you're trying to figure out what the hell is going on.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. And there wasn't any way at that point for you to know.
Yeah, that's true. We weren't told a lot about it, in terms of the training, the 8 or 10 weeks. Yeah, I don't know. I think some of it was. I just don't think the training was effective, at least of what I was used to in terms of Liberia. So it was a combination. The training was at a place called, kind of a training area called Totata. Totata was a city, but there was a little missionary training type facility there, and we were there for, I think it was 10 weeks.
Another 10 weeks.
Yeah.
So you had 10 weeks in the States.
Yeah. So we got there, 11th or 12th of September, I think, sometime in that time span, and then we got out like the November 1st or 2nd. So, yeah.
And when you did figure out what was going on, what was going on?
Well, we didn't figure that out, I don't think. We didn't really know. I don't think we knew the severity or really what was going on.
That seemed dangerous, didn't it? I mean,
in some ways we were too stupid. I think in some ways we were too stupid to really know. We knew too little about the country to really know what was going on, and we were pretty much confined to that training area. So we weren't getting out. When we got out to go and look at different things like fish ponds, things like that.
You were required, right?
Yes, yeah. And so we weren't out individually. But one of the things too is we knew that there was an election coming up, but they really didn't talk much about the election. And there was a song that was really popular by a duo or a group called Zach and Jita, and it's called Sweet Liberia. And in this song of Sweet Liberia, they stopped singing. The music's still going, but they stopped singing, and they talk about an election that's coming up and wishes for a peaceful election. And I don't think any of us really clued into anything along those lines. And, they didn't really talk about this election other than there would be an election, and it would be in November. I think it was in November. It was either the end of October or the beginning of November.
Okay.
And I believe we were still in training. We were right at the end of in-country training at that time. We'd heard about allegations of human rights violations, but they didn't get into any of that in training.
Okay.
And so we were, and maybe I missed some things, but we were pretty ignorant of what was really going on. We were focused on the training and the cross-cultural training and some language. The language was primarily that we were taught was Liberian English, which is primarily like American English. A lot of the words were different. Some influx of tribal dialects. There were some words, like child was peeking. Mad was vexed, but you could figure that out. Juju was like black magic. Various things like that. Kui meant Western or civilized, or white in some connotations. So there were words like that. The pronunciations were different. Some of the definitions of words were different, but you could kind of figure it out. In
time, you can.
Relatively quickly, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Then we, so Liberia was a country about the size of Ohio, but I think there were 23 different dialects in there, in that country.
And they're all pretty distinct, right?
Yeah.
If you live in one place and you speak that dialect, you're not sure at all that when you go to another one, you can speak and be understood.
Yeah. And one of the things I think is significant to know about Liberia that sets it apart in a lot of ways from other African countries is it was ruled for over 140 years or 138 years by freed American slaves. So started in the 1820s, but there were becoming a lot of freed slaves in America, and there was an abolitionist movement that wanted basically to get rid of them. And so this movement eventually under President Monroe, in the U.S. purchased land.
And that's like 1820, right?
I think when it was actually formed, it was 1832, but it was like in the 1820s. Okay. But yes. So anyway, like Liberia, for instance, the capital is Monrovia, and it's the only international capital named after a U.S. president. And that was a result of that. Well, anyway, they were ruled by freed American slaves called Americo Liberians, not America, Americo Liberians, and they were the ruling class until 1980, and there was a successful military coup where the president was killed, and so was all but like two of the cabinet members of.
So all these Americo were gone?
They weren't. The Americos were gone. A lot of them fled because they were kind of persecuted and came back to the U.S., but some of them stayed. But anyway, a master sergeant led the successful coup in 1980, and he was the president when I got in, Samuel K. Doe. But the country was never a prosperous country. I mean, there was always a lot of corruption there, a lot of resources, but the resources went other places. I mean, people got rich off of that. I'm sure, some of the Liberian ruling class did, but for the most part, it didn't filter. Yeah, it didn't filter down.
Yeah.
And a lot of things went on the black market to other countries and things like that. But anyway, the country was in a downward spiral politically and economically. Shortly after we left, it just went through total political and economic collapse. So literally, kind of why we were there too. And one of the things, talking about the politics of everything, we can get into it at various different points, but it wasn't like the U.S. where you're watching CNN or CBS News or Fox News or anything like that, where it's like all these things are happening, kind of like what they are now, but they're not really so much directly affecting you. That stuff directly affected our lives as volunteers on a daily level. In so many different ways, and I can kind of talk about that in different ways, the way that it did that at some point, but I think we're still talking about training at this point.
Yeah. Well, I think unless there's something else you wanted me to know about your training that was really
it's
consequential.
Yeah, we talked a couple weeks ago. And one of the things that you asked me then was like the difference between the trainings in state, with Auburn and the training in Liberia, and was it on the same level as Auburn? And the answer was no. And was it effective? And I don't think it was effective from a variety of standpoints. I mean, I learned some things, and some of the stuff like with Liberian English. But one of the things I said to you was, it seemed like at Auburn, it was more experiential and learning, but the experiential in the sense that we were kind of teaching ourselves through being prodded in certain ways. So we were figuring out how to learn about this, and it was more like we were being talked to, or not talked down to, but talked to. And so I can kind of give an example, like for instance, because there were technical parts in country in Liberia as well. But at Auburn, we learned how to grow fish by growing fish, and we had our own pond.
Yeah.
In Liberia, we went and looked at ponds. And
wow.
Yeah.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah. In Auburn, we had to grow fish and manage and do water quality tests. We talked about water quality and things like that in Liberia, and it was so I think that was like the biggest difference. And
let me ask at this point: did one of you at any point stick up your hand and say, "Wait a minute, we're kind of missing the boat here"?
I think it was a little bit different. I mean, I think we didn't really think that it was effective. I can't speak for the other volunteers, but but I think as a group that we didn't think that. We wanted to get to our site. It's like we had already been in training 10 weeks.
Right.
Both Oklahoma and Auburn were very intense, different ways, but very intense. And it was like, let's get to it. You know, we've had enough of this stuff. And
oh, I understand.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So, yeah.
So the training wasn't quite as efficient or as beneficial to you in Liberia as it had been.
Right.
But.
And then I think from a standpoint of not really giving us a true feel of what the country was like, too.
Oh, yeah. Sounds like that you didn't get that at all.
Right.
So
we got it, but not, it wasn't pounded in. You know, I mean, it's kind of like we just didn't know the culture. And again, I'm speaking for myself. And then we got things like motorcycle training and things like that, because that would be our mode of transportation, you know, while we were in the country.
Yeah. Okay. So when did you decamp from there to go to your assignment?
So the beginning of November. And so, you know, we were given a lot of, at least from that standpoint, a lot of money, you know, in order to buy like supplies that we would need. And so we all went to the Capitol after we were sworn in. And spent a couple of days there, and you know, it was kind of nice because there's some Western influences there. I don't think every country had this, but we had embassy privileges, so we could go to the embassy, and they had a commissary there, and we could go in and out. I don't know if you've ever been to a foreign embassy about how hard it is to get in. We'd go in and just show our ID and give like a peace sign or something sarcastic like that.
We'd go to the embassy to get hamburgers.
Yeah, that's what we did.
That's about it.
Yeah, it was the same thing with us. Yeah. Yeah, I say commissary. You know, there was a restaurant there and stuff like that, and there were some westernized restaurants in Monrovia and things.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. All right. So where did you wind up going?
So, kind of going back to the American influence, the country was divided into counties, and it's kind of because of the ruling class, and so a little bit of kind of an American influence on that. And anyway, I ended up in a county called Nimba County. And there was, so at least with fisheries, at least in Liberia, like education volunteers came in at a different time in the country, but you know, they went to work for the Minister of Education, and they would be, you know, like in the schools. We were kind of placed in different groups. In Nimba County, there was a development organization there. It was called the Nimba County Rural Development Project, and it was a cooperation of Liberia and West Germany. And a lot of people, and I know you would know, the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, it was the West German equivalent of USAID, and so the actual organization was the German Agency for Technical Cooperation called GDZ, and they ran this cooperation. So there were a number of volunteers. Nimba County was pretty big, but it got spread out, and I was actually at the headquarters of NCRDP. What
do you mean you were there? Is that where you're?
Yeah, so the majority of the time, but yes, and I use their offices a lot, but the NCRDP compound where all the offices and everything else, and the fishery station and everything else was in Saclopia, and that's where I was. But I had, you know, I want to say like about a 40-mile radius. I think it was about a 40-mile radius of different farms. So, you know, there were a couple principles of development that the Peace Corps had and NCRDP had, and that is, you know, you did things that had appropriate technology, so they could be sustained after we left, and then also that you had counterparts where you're doing skill transference, and I had 3 counterparts in kind of different areas of the portion of the county where I was at, and then working with our duties were, because there were several, or I think there were 8 or 9 of us that did inland fisheries with NCRDP, but throughout, you know, Nimba County. And so I had 3 counterparts, and, you know, it was basically to teach them, but in a lot of ways they taught me. So, I mean,
sure.
we taught each other, and it was good. So,
But you were supposed to be there to give them some ideas that would enable them to sustain
Right.
what they have
Yeah.
in an efficient and cost-effective way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And do you feel like you did that?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. I think the thing that was the sustainability of it, and some of it wouldn't have mattered no matter what, because we can kind of get into it a little later, but the country went into a 12-year civil war over 14 years. And massive death, massive refugees, etc. It went from possibly, I can't remember, I think it was the 23rd poorest country in the world down to the second poorest. Or, and because I know that from 2010, doing some research for a presentation I was making to a college class about Liberia.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, but the Germans gave us a lot of, when I say Germans, NCRDP, they would refer to us as Americans, we refer to them as Germans, or various things along those lines. But we had a lot of resources through them, and I don't think those resources, regardless of the Civil War, could have been sustained, or even shortly after. Shortly after us. And so, like an example of, they had this massive fishery station, and I don't think that there was the resources, if they were to pull out, to keep that going. I know that like one of the people I worked with pretty closely, he wasn't my counterpart, but we kind of worked together in a lot of ways. He was kind of like the head Liberian in inland fisheries portion of NCRDP, because they were involved in everything, upland crops, engineering, water, etc. Like he went to Israel one time to get fry. Those are the really baby fish, and then at the fishery station they grow them into fingerlings, and then we take the fingerlings and then put them in the ponds of the farms that we were working with farmers. But that probably wouldn't have been able to be sustained.
Because where would those come from?
Well, and they could keep, they could grow their own fry, but again, the country kind of, literally fell apart shortly after we left. And again, it's kind of down the road a little bit. This is at the beginning, but one of the things too that in NCRDP supplied a lot to the farmers, and so. I helped, whoever the technician was, we helped build them, help the farmer groups, build ponds. And so you need to figure out a way that you have an inflow, that you can control the inflow of the water to the pond and the outflow. So you would basically get it off of a stream. The stream wouldn't always have water, but at certain times it would. And then you would divert that stream into the pond, through a channel, and then the same thing kind of going out. So you would need pipe. And so, the NCRDP supplied the farmers through us with PVC pipe, and then also cement to build collars on it so it wouldn't erode out. Well, I want to say the pipe was like $7.50 or $10 there, and
who's got that kind of money?
And the cement was cost. One time I knew what the total cost of having a collar, on both the inflow and the outflow. I can't remember specifically now. Maybe $15. Sounds like not much. So the average wage of people that worked in Liberia at that time, the per capita income was about $220 a year. And the standard labor rate for people that had a job was like $1 a day for a 10 to 12 hour work week. So, $15 doesn't sound like much, but if you put that into a couple of weeks worth of pay, if you were to get paid, because the country was crumbling economically, so a lot of times they wouldn't get paid. Things like that. So,
what about the family situation there? What was that like? I think I got the impression that the man was the master.
Yeah, I mean, it was a male-dominated society, and I mean, legally, it was a male-dominated society. Women could not own property. Women did a lot of work. So did men. I mean, but the women kind of, in my opinion, were kind of the backbone of a lot of things going on. I mean, they didn't build ponds with us, or at least in my experience. I mean, some of them could, but various things like that. But they kept everything going. But
you said the women did the work and the men.
Well, they kind of positioned
looking important.
Yeah, I think looking important was really a big deal, in terms of Liberia, and the appearance was very important. And they took a lot of pride in their appearance. Even up country, a lot of times, they would have ironed clothes, and by that,
you get an iron when you're living in a mud hut.
Yeah. So you've seen in museums about those old irons from like the 19th century, where you put coal in them. Yeah, that way. Yeah, and so, but anyway, it's just, I don't know. Kind of lost my train of thought a little bit.
Well, I wanted to ask about the children too. The children, I guess, are growing up modeled after their parents, so that it's still male dominated. The boys are... Yeah,
let's go back to that family situation, because it's kind of complicated. I don't know if complicated is the right word, but confusing a little bit. So there was this expression that people lived in quarters in the city, and a lot of time in various villages or cities, and that was kind of like an area, and they were all considered brothers and sisters, but they would always... how many brothers or sisters do you have? Well, you'd have to clarify that, same ma, same pa, or same ma, different pa. And various things like that. It's a polygamous society as well. And
so the husband had multiple wives.
The answer is legally yes, but what happened more than often, because if they had a second or third wife, which you could do, as I understood it, but you were also financially responsible for them. So there were a lot of women that got pregnant out of wedlock, and the man would not marry them, so they wouldn't be financially obligated to them. And so, that was terrible.
What did they do?
They may do the best they could.
What man would want to marry a woman who had children by somebody else? Wasn't that a big problem?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, from my perspective, because you really couldn't tell what the traditional family unit was. It was harder to tell. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Of what that was, and that whole, that's my pa, that's my ma. It wasn't necessarily their biological one.
Okay.
And so...
Did that create difficulty for you when you're trying to establish a relationship with the people that you're working with on your fisheries project?
Not really. I mean, it was just kind of the way things were, and we adapted to that way.
You didn't want to interfere. You didn't want to...
In some ways we did, in some ways we didn't. I mean, it kind of gets down to the situation standpoint, and how much we actually knew about something. Sometimes, we interfered, or sometimes we did things that maybe, we shouldn't. Not a lot of men treated the women very nicely, and some didn't. Kind of like in the States. I don't know what the percentage difference might be between the States and the other, but for instance, I can give you an example in some of the ways the laws were. So a friend of mine, they lived in the same county, but her boyfriend was beat. This woman had a Liberian boyfriend. It was a Liberian woman having a Liberian boyfriend, and she was getting abused, and
by him,
by the Liberian boyfriend.
Yeah.
And the Peace Corps fisheries volunteer that was a friend of mine. I mean, we were all kind of friends, but anyway, he took her to another village to escape that. And pretty much all hell broke loose.
Wow.
And because the law, the way that I understood it and what it seemed to be, I don't know if it was in writing this way, but he violated the law from a standpoint of if a woman's, say, getting beaten, that you don't have the right to get in the middle of a man controlling his property, and the property
That's
being
a
the
law
woman.
that says that.
That was the law that we knew it. I don't know if it was in
Okay.
writing or not, but anyway, that was the law as we knew it.
So he was violating
Right.
that law
Exact-
or practice
right.
or whatever it was.
Yeah. And
But
so
he was doing it for good reason, right?
right. So it caused a massive controversy in his village, the way that I understood it, in like several hours, like all the elders and everything. And anyway, it all
Oh,
got rectified. But yeah, it was a major deal for him. And I didn't see that, but we were good friends. And
That could have gotten him kicked out, couldn't it?
yeah.
'Cause-
Oh, well, yeah, probably it could have, but it didn't.
All right. Still, it sounds very challenging to establish relationships in the kind of society that you're describing.
I don't know. I mean, in some ways yes, and in some ways no. But no, I think we all created relationships. Some more than others. But I feel that I had a lot of decent relationships. I had some really close relationships. Some were more of a traditional family, the way things were done, and some weren't. But
Did you ever live with a family?
no, I don't think any.
Did any of them? Any of your fellow PCVs?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, that just wasn't done at that time in that country.
Right.
Okay.
I don't think it was. I mean, I just think. I think maybe some of it was just we preferred that because sometimes we just needed to get
Sure.
to not escape, but to be among ourselves. A couple of volunteers might have lived together, but for the most part, we lived individually.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I don't know if that works. I think one of the things that got in the way of relationships was the way that they viewed white people, and it was hard to see for them. In my opinion, it's hard for them to see us as individuals because of the stereotype. And one kind of really crude example of that is that I just feel that they kind of viewed us. We stuck out, and they kind of viewed
Sure
us
did.
as kind of like being rich and famous, in the U.S. And I don't mean that like the adulation or anything like that, but it's just like they couldn't really see us as a person. Everybody knew everything that, at least in my case, and I think in a lot of cases, everything that we did.
How did they spy on you?
There were times that I saw people, like looking in my window and everything. But it was peaceful and everything like that. It's just that they kind of wanted to be our friends, and some of that was legitimate, but some of that was for the status of being a friend of a white person in the way that I interpreted it.
They saw white people as being superior. And if that's not the right word, what is the right word?
Well, number one, I think that they saw us as a conduit to basically be getting some things, whether it be jobs or,
facilitator.
A facilitator, or we had a lot more than they had. Even for Peace Corps volunteers, we had a lot more, so they might, get things from that standpoint. I don't think I'm doing a very good job of communicating it, but there was certainly that standpoint.
Did
There
they
was a-
believe that all of you were wealthy?
Yeah, certainly
Yeah.
wealthy, and a lot of times calling us being intelligent. And I think that was a stereotype, but I don't think necessarily they really thought that we were intelligent. They were, I don't know if it was a way of buttering us up or whatever, but that was, I heard that so many times. Oh, you're so intelligent, or you're so this, and
Yeah.
you know, they didn't. You wouldn't use the word intelligence, more like smart. But anyway.
Were they doing that, do you think, so that they could get something from you right then, like buy me a beer or give me your pack of cigarettes or whatever? Or
There was certainly that. I mean, I don't know how many times we all got, you know, dash me something small, meaning give me something, give me, you know, a small dash or small, not bribe, but a small something. Yeah,
because you've got all this wealth.
Yeah, I mean, you
why
know,
wouldn't you?
Yeah, and you know, you walk down the street and it's like Quiplu, meaning white person. You know, give me some, you know, give me this. Hey, you're my friend, you're my best friend, and they couldn't. It was difficult in a lot of cases to be able to break through as who you were as a person, but you could in some cases, but still we were white people, and. In a lot of ways, we were put up on a pedestal. It was a fake pedestal, I think, but we were certainly put up there. And at first, it's kind of cool, you know. I mean, it's like you're walking through, and everybody has your attention and everything. But it's very dehumanizing.
Oh, I think
and sometimes it's like, get away from me, you know. I mean, I don't not as an individual, but it's just like I need my space, and they would try to be manipulating and get money or get bribes, you know, like police officers would try to get bribes from us, like at checkpoints, or the soldiers would try to get bribes, and we were pretty good about refusing to get bribes, and sometimes it caused problems, and you know, sometimes it didn't, but yeah, it certainly happened a lot on that level.
Okay. Tell us now about your motorcycle accident. That was quite something.
Well, actually, there's a couple of other things that are quite something before that.
Okay.
Because that was kind of towards the second half, or at least towards the second half. So one of the things too is that you know, not being prepared for what was going on in the country, and so we had been in our sights about a week, and an attempted coup happened, and so martial law was put in place, and it was terrible. And it was a very, very scary time. And so there were, you know, like when I went to Sacopia for the first time, I think that there were 3 checkpoints in between the capital and Sacopia.
How many miles is that?
Roughly 240 to 200. So when the coup happened, and there were 13. And checkpoints, and so
from 3 to 13.
Yeah, and then it went from there was a 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. curfew, and so if you were out after curfew, you know, you would be executed, and so also
not tried, not arrested, executed.
Yeah.
Wow.
So well, anyway, so there was that, and there was a lot of targeting certain tribes, you know. The president was a certain tribe, and like the tribes that were in Nimba County where I live, there were 2, Mon and Gio, and so the tribe in the city of Sacopia was Mon, and there was a lot of retributions coming against them. Plus, the person that tried to do the coup and was killed and partially cannibalized, because that's kind of the custom, I guess, on something like that. That they. Then anyway, he was from a city 10 miles from where I lived, and so there was retributions happening that way, because we really didn't know what was going on. You know, we didn't know, we weren't really prepared for that to happen, and I think we all adapted fairly well. You know, some people really flipped out.
They go home.
Some did, yeah. And then some got involved politically. In some ways, it was kind of exhilarating. You know, it's kind of like we're in the middle of a civil war, or not. You know, we're in the middle of a revolution. This is kind of cool. You know, but anyway, so that took a toll on a lot of people and various things like that. There were a lot of rumors going on, and you know, you talk about, like, I was trying to get into the difference between the politics, like what it would be in the U.S. and just kind of watching it from afar, to where you're there. So when I got to Sacagawea, there weren't any houses available. And so I was living in the Peace Corps guest house that the Germans put up for us. And anyway, it was down, 3 or 4 weeks away from that. But this house that became my house, the family that was living there, the father was supposedly involved in the coup. And so they had to flee. So that house became vacant, and then I eventually rented it, and part of it was a business or a bar, but I mean, that was defunct, but part of my house, it wasn't connected from the interior, but there was there was really a physical
You didn't
bar.
have to go far for a drink.
Well, no, it wasn't operating, but it was a bar when they had it. But anyway, I mean, that's how I got my house, and so the father went back up country after a while. So I'm not exactly sure. He died in April of that year. And so they said it was a heart attack, but I don't know if it was related to the coup. You kind of wonder, or I kind of wonder about things like that. So, but anyway, the coup was on a Tuesday morning. And at about 6 a.m., radios and boom boxes and everything was just booming with Sweet Liberia. People were dancing in the street because this coup had happened, and the first reports were that it was successful. Well, then, it turned that it wasn't.
They had removed dough?
Yeah.
Okay.
But then it was determined that it wasn't. And so anyway, that's when the retributions were happening, and there was physically I didn't see anything. That family fled. People talked about just how scary it was, and some people got into more danger than others. And so on a Saturday, a couple of things happened here. So that was Tuesday, and the Saturday afterwards, I was going to meet with a farmer about fisheries, and he probably wouldn't have been there because literally everything was shut down in the country. I mean, just everything was shut down. The German compound was locked tight, various things like that. I wasn't feeling really well, but I thought I'll go and meet, and I felt really stiff and everything. Well, anyway, so I go because I have to walk. Well, it's just like I was feeling really bad at this point, so I turned around and was going back.
Keep going.
And ran into this woman, a Peace Corps volunteer, and there was somebody else, and they said that a death squad was coming up to Sacagawea for retributions. And so I don't know if that was true or if that was not true, but we decided we were going to try to figure out and find some information on this. And so the week before, I met the chief of police, and the chief of police said, you could come by and visit me anytime you want. Mm-hmm. So I thought, let's go to the police station and see if we can find out any news. And so we go to the police station, and again, I'm kind of getting sick at this time, and I'm with this woman, and we go into the police station, and I said, there's the chief of police here, and he wasn't, and the deputies started screaming at me.
Okay.
I'm sorry. So the chief of police starts screaming at me, and they pushed me into the police house, push her out, and start screaming, "What are you doing here?" And she's like, "Well," he said, the only thing I could think of, well, he said I could come by anytime, and I thought I'm looking for a house, and thought he might be able to help me. That's the only thing I could think of. So they sit me down there. He's screaming at me. There's these two gentlemen in there I'd never seen before in my life. I never saw afterwards. But anyway, so this woman, Ivy League graduate, mind you, gets pushed out. She's out there. I can see the window. I kind of look back at her, and she makes a face at me. And I don't know why she makes a face at me, but it caused me to smirk. And then I cross my legs, kind of like what I'm doing now, kind of as a nervous thing. And that's an insult in Liberia. In West
crossing your leg?
Yeah, because you're showing the sole of your foot. And so, and then I smirked, but it wasn't in him. And the deputy police, who fairly rough and mean person, means arrests me and saying that, you know, I'm going to lock you in a cell and throw away the key. And these two people had never seen me before are basically bargaining for me. It's like, and I'll never forget what they said. I'm kind of deciphering the dialect, deciphering some of the Liberian English, and I was like, he's just a stupid foreigner. He doesn't know any better. Let him go. And I'm like thinking to myself, what he said, you know? Right. And so anyway, the chief of police comes and he lets me go. And so he's walking out and he puts his arms around me and, or, you know, his arm around my shoulder and says, you can come and visit me anytime, but not in the middle of a coup. So I go back to the house, and by this time I'm really sick. And I literally collapsed in the front yard. And
What do you think you had?
I didn't know.
You didn't know at that time?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I remember vomiting, and I remember just like spinning around, and there it wasn't a pool of blood, but there's a significant amount of blood in my vomit. And anyway, so I go inside, and I mean, I'm really sick. I mean, my temperature, I don't know what it was the first time I took it, but it was ranging between 105.6 and 106.2. And just
serious.
Oh yeah, and I was kind of like hallucinating a little bit. And things like that. And so they got word to the German compound, and so these two, one was the woman that I was with, you know, with the police station, but then she went back and got this other woman, and they came by and they saw how sick I was. They went and told the Germans, and they gave a bunch of ice. And so they bring this bucket of ice. There wasn't a whole bunch, but there was, you know, ice in there. Uh-huh. And I was so excited because, like, I love ice water. I hadn't seen an ice cube in over 2 months. Yeah. And it's like, I'm going to get a glass of ice water. Well, they filled it full of water. And I was like, oh, man. And then they put sheets in it and covered my body trying to get the temperature down. And so there was that standpoint, really, really sick. And they also told the Germans that, and the head of the compound, that I got arrested, and it was like he went to a police station in the middle of a coup, and I would have probably gotten in some trouble if I wasn't so sick. So this was Saturday night, and there's this book. I don't know when you were a Peace Corps volunteer, is the book Where There Is No Doctor. Was that out when you were?
No.
So we were all given the book Where There Is No Doctor, and we used that a lot to self-diagnose others or ourselves and everything. And so determined that it was malaria. And so, you know, did the curative dose and everything else, but I was still really bad. And
so there was a hospital where you were?
No.
What was there?
I'm in the Peace Corps guest house, laying.
Well,
so
nobody's diagnosed you. You diagnosed yourself?
No, the volunteers diagnosed me.
Oh, all right.
And so I take the curative dose. Because we were told in a lot of ways, you know, don't come in unless it's just like really, really serious. But we couldn't get in anyway because of all the checkpoints in between us and the Capitol. So with that said, I thought that it was malaria. Turned out to be, that was part of it. But anyway, I did have malaria. But I didn't get any better on Sunday. And I mean, I was really bad. And so...
You think I might not make it?
No, I never thought that.
Okay.
I think that was reality, but I didn't think that.
Any of the other Peace Corps volunteers didn't they said, we got to get him out of here.
Yeah.
We got to get him.
Yeah, that was the question, but the question was how. So there were, like I said, there were 13 military checkpoints between, you know, where we were and to the Capitol. And so that it couldn't do that. The country was shut down. I mean, there were no cars on the road. There was no, people were in their houses, various things like that. So the question was, how do we get me anywhere? Well, the thought was that we couldn't get me to the Capitol. I'm not involved in these discussions.
Yeah.
We couldn't get me to the Capitol, but they could get me to this missionary hospital about halfway to the Capitol called Phoebe. Phoebe is a missionary hospital, and so there were no vehicles. What they did on Monday. So on Monday, through a Peace Corps volunteer with the money given by the Germans, they bribed what we call money bus. It was, a Toyota pickup with a cabin on it.
Yeah.
To take us to the Capitol. There's some different, like this kind of book that I put together long afterwards with quotes, and this one person wrote the quote that we took Brien Thorstenberg to Phoebe, and we were the only car on the road, and we have to go through all these checkpoints. And so they bribed a money bus to do that. And I was so sick I wasn't scared. I mean, I was so kind of out of it in that sense.
You have to bribe the checkpoints too.
So we get to the first checkpoint, and they order everybody out of the car, but the other volunteers, because we have some volunteers, and I showed you last time that there's a document on the wall of the travel papers saying how seriously ill I am, and that we need to get medical attention to me. But they told me to stay in the car, so I stayed in the car. So they went in, and they were telling what was going on, and we had to get me to the hospital, or they had to get me to the hospital. And I think they said because I was dying. And so they had a soldier come out to take a look at me to see if it wasn't a lie or not. And I'll never forget, he looks at me and then tells the group pass, for it to go on through. And so I thought that was kind of strange, because I was thinking when he was walking up, it's like, how am I going to look sick? And anyway, so we go through, we get to Phoebe. One thing we talked about a lot of the last time, but we haven't really talked about it, just the whole thing with the way we were treated with the white of the skin and the color of our skin. And so we get to Phoebe, and there's just this huge amount of crowd that's waiting to get in to be seen. And I think I saw one gunshot wound, maybe another. I'm not really sure on that because I was so out of it.
Yeah.
But anyway, we bypassed the crowd. I mean, I don't know how many people were there, but it wasn't like
Just
10 or
swept
20.
right in, huh?
Yeah, they just took me in. And get into this exam room, and I'm on a table, and they're trying to put an IV on me and everything. And I have 3 doctors. And I'm thinking, and several nurses, and I'm thinking of all these people out in the waiting room, but
Don't have anybody.
Yeah, and I thought that's not right, but I was really sick, and so and anyway, there was this Peace Corps volunteer who was a nurse there that I knew, that we became friends in training, and I asked if she was working, and this nurse went out to get her. I didn't ask her to go get her, but she went out to get her. And her name was Margot Ray. And she comes into the room, and she just freezes. And she just has this weirdest look on her face, incredulous look, just stares and doesn't say a word.
Yeah.
And I don't say anything, and it goes on for a minute or two.
Wow.
And it seemed like a lot longer, and then finally, because I thought, well, I made her mad because I asked to see her, or I asked if she was working. I didn't ask to see her, but if she was working. And finally I said, Margot, what's wrong? And she goes, oh my God, I had no idea who you were until you spoke. And so, it's like, how sick am I? I thought that myself, to myself. I didn't say anything out loud. But I changed that much drastically in 3 weeks that she didn't recognize me physically. And so... So anyway, malaria is one of the things that I had, but I also had pneumonia. And I think that's what...
Same time?
Yeah.
Whoa.
And that's what contributed to, like, the blood in my vomit.
Uh-huh.
And so, and I was pretty bad off.
What do they do for you there?
The penicillin, obviously, and the treatment. They had me stay with the two nurses, the two Peace Corps nurses in their house. They had a spare bedroom because they felt that I would get better care there than I would in the hospital. And so I did that.
Okay. And so how long were you there?
I think about a week.
Getting better?
Yeah.
And then discharged to go back?
Yeah, and I went back to my site.
How did you feel when you were discharged?
I was weak. I'd lost a lot of weight. I mean, that
Give me an idea.
I weighed 100. I want to say when I went in the country, I weighed about 152 pounds, somewhere in that neighborhood, between 150 and 155. I'm 6'1", so even that was really thin.
Yeah.
I was down to 125, 123, 125.
Wow.
I was just literally skin and bones.
Uh-huh.
And so and I think I told you this. Margot told a volunteer, because I told a volunteer that years later, and just like I said, would Margot agree to that? That she didn't recognize me, and Margot told her I looked like somebody that was released from Auschwitz. And I don't think I don't think I did, but it was.
Well, you might have.
I don't know.
You lost that amount of weight.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's terrible.
But.
So you went back to your assignment.
Yes.
And
then the house became vacant shortly after that, or I rented the house shortly about that, and kind of got on with my job until the Christmas, the country kind of shut down during Christmas.
so is this a good time to start your description of the motorcycle accident?
We're
People
still a
wanna
year.
hear this.
Well, they may want to hear this one too. So I mentioned that the family evacuated the house where I was at. So there was all the furniture, and so they packed up the German compound. Or the German project. They packed up all their furniture, and it was being taken down to Monrovia. And so at this time, there's still martial law. There's still a curfew. It had been relaxed a little bit. I think at this time it was 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And anyway, I was going down to Monrovia anyway, and they wanted me to go with the truck, so I went with the truck. And all these people had little side things, like where he would be stopping at various places to pick up other stuff to take to, and get a little bit of money. And this was taking time, and I was getting really mad and everything. So we get to the last checkpoint as we enter Monrovia, and it's 10 after 5. So we're after curfew and it's martial law. All these whistles and soldiers start running up to the vehicle, to the Mendigo truck.
Scary.
Yeah. They literally physically pull me out of the car, and or out of the truck, the cabin. I think they left the driver alone. I'm not sure, but because I'm kind of occupied at this point.
Yeah.
And so they take me up. They have my arms and everything, and they take me up to the soldier who's like the head of the checkpoint, and he's in a chair like this, and he's very drunk, and he's got a thing of cane juice, which is pure grain alcohol, basically moonshine, and it's here, and he's kind of like this in a chair going back and forth, and there's an M16 on his lap. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm explaining this, and then I smoked, and he could see cigarettes in my packet, or in my pocket, and so he asked, "Can I have a cigarette?" And I said, "Sure." So I pulled the cigarette out. Well, he wanted a different brand, so he wanted the money for the cigarettes. And I had a lot of money on me, and like, I mentioned, $1 a day is the wage rate. Well, I had over $100 on me, and also in U.S. cash.
Well, that's quite a bit to be carrying around.
Yeah.
There.
So anyway, I wasn't going to pay anything, and I said, I don't have any money. And so,
Even though you had 100, you told him you didn't have any.
right,
Okay.
because the law is basically what a drunk soldier is telling you it is. and the fine would be basically whatever I had in my pocket. That was my thought process. It's still probably stupid to do this. Well, anyway, so he's going like this, and I refuse to give him any money. And so he takes the M16 and goes like that. He's holding it with one hand. He hits the safety off of his thumb like that. And then he says, and he puts his finger on the trigger, and he says, "What do you have for the man?" And he's pointing the gun at my face, and he's probably 1.5 to 2 feet away from me. So it sounds really brave, but it's also very stupid. And I was also kind of shaking. I felt like I was physically shaking. I don't know if visibly I was. But anyway, I said, because I just felt that if I gave him money, it would just make the situation worse. And I said, "You can arrest me, you can detain me, you can shoot me, do what you want to do, but I have nothing for the man." And you put O after every sentence. I have nothing for the man, O. And so he just stared at me.
Nothing for the what?
For the man. But you put O's after the end of the question, so for the man,
okay.
O. And
Man meaning the...
meaning him.
Boss.
No, him.
Oh, him. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And but anyway, he stared at me for a while, kept the cop, put the rifle back down, and said, "Go." And
Boy, you were lucky.
yeah.
I don't think I would have done that. I would have given you some money.
I don't know if I would have done it again, but I did it. I got in. I did a lot of things. I wasn't. My wife said I've never been one to practice good judgment, and so
She would know.
yeah. So anyway, so there was certainly that. I mean, I think things went along pretty well. I think I was doing good in my job. I was learning a lot, getting to know the people. I developed some pretty good friendships with Liberians and also with other volunteers. And one nice thing about NCRDP, we got to see other volunteers sometimes, relatively a lot. Not certainly every day, not necessarily every week, but some were a lot more remote from the capital. But it was, it was that way. The black on black prejudice really surprised me. A lot of it was tribal. A lot of it went back to the tone or the color of the black of the skin.
Some were blacker than others.
Yeah, and it just seemed like the lighter the skin, the more, I don't know, stature or whatever the person had.
Okay.
Which wasn't right.
So the very black were the most discriminated against.
In my opinion, yeah. I don't know how accurate that was, but it seemed that way. And, women basically had no rights. But they were able to survive in a lot of ways and everything like that. So it was a good experience. Got to know people. The people were good. I think like everywhere there were not good people or people that weren't so good, and then people that were good. Some people, I think, had genuine friendships. I think some people had ulterior motives to being my friend, and sometimes I didn't always see through that. And I think, and then some people just, weren't the best and were corrupt, so the accident is, I describe it kind of as one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. So we got.
When was this?
This was in my second year. In late January, my second year. So, I've been in the Peace Corps over a year and a half, I think, at this point.
Okay.
And so, things I felt going really well and all that. Well, I was going to meet with a farmer on a Saturday morning, and it was probably about 30 miles, from my house. And we didn't really talk about it this time, but one of the things too is that just these were all dirt roads. There's only one paved highway, only about a 200-mile stretch in the entire country, and so the highways were dirt, and they would get cut, and they were, is a rainforest area where we lived, and so there'd be huge ruts and various things like that. Well, I'm pretty, I'm off the the more popular road or the more traveled road, and I'm in a kind of a very isolated road, and I'm going down a hill at about 35 to 40 miles an hour, and there's nothing around, you know, and there could have been, but you know, like with all the banana trees and palm trees and the thick vegetation, it looked like there wasn't. So I'm going down in a little 5-year-old boy. So there's like rice paddies to each side, and there's a canal, and a little boy just like literally like rolls out of that and is in the middle of kind of the rut that I'm in, where it was more or less impossible to jump because, you know, the water cuts these big crevices, you know, in there, and I wouldn't have been able to go, so I slammed on my brakes, and my bike kind of went like that for the camera, probably not even a 45-degree angle. Anyway, my thought is that the little boy was trying to crawl between the wheels. I thought thousands of times, like, what was he trying to do? Because I felt like I bought him enough time if he'd just rolled the other way. Anyway, I hit him head on, and I went flying over the handlebars.
Did he walk into the road, or was he in the road?
It was like he rolled into the road.
Rolled.
Yeah, it was like he must have been in the ditch and then kind of came out, but he was on all fours when I hit him. And
looking right at you. Was he looking right
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was, you know, kind of I mean, you know, I could see him, but I don't know exactly where his eyes were. But I certainly hit him, like, right here. And
so you hit him head on?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And it was, so I go flying over the handlebars, and I land on my head, evidently, and I get knocked unconscious. And I'm lying face down. I'm not exactly sure how long I was out. I don't know if it was a few seconds, a few minutes, or what. But I wake up, and I have no idea where I'm at. And by that, I mean, I don't even know I'm in Africa.
Yeah.
And so I'm lying there face down into the dirt trying to figure out where I'm at. And I literally traced my steps back from Ponca City, Oklahoma, to joining the Peace Corps, to, you know, all these steps. And then all of a sudden I realized, I know I was on my motorcycle, and I think I hit a kid. And I roll over, and I look back. The boy is underneath the wheel, and evidently, like, the fender hit him like right here and just like flipped his scalp back like a pancake.
Oh, wow.
And it's just blood up here. And so at this point, I hear all this screaming and wailing. And so I don't know if they were like in the rice paddies bent down, you know, like harvesting before the wreck, or what, or if I'd been out for 5 or 10 minutes. And anyway, so they come and they grab me, and they weren't going to let me go. So I don't know if all this is true, but one of the things that we were told, and, you know, there's a lot of rumors and everything, that years ago that a train ran over, I think, an older person or a baby, something like that, and there was a big settlement. And so then people started throwing old people and babies in front of the trains or vehicles to get a settlement. Whether or not that's true or not, but we were told, if you ever get in a wreck, don't give any money, you know, don't basically give any assistance.
Who were you told that by?
It seemed like the
Peace Corps?
I think the Peace Corps. I'm kind of going by memory, but it's just like that was kind of like the common thing. And yeah, actually the Peace Corps. I do remember. I kind of hate to say that because it sounds so bad, but anyway, they weren't going to let me go because the way the laws were, you know, we talked about, like, if a man was beating a woman, you're interfering with his right to control his property.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, if you were to leave the scene of an accident like that for whatever reason, you were innocent. And I guess it kind of goes back to, if you're not there, they can't prove that you were there. I mean, I don't know the logic behind it, but that was really what at least we believed, and the way that they acted. So they weren't going to let me leave, so I would be responsible for it. But there probably weren't going to be another vehicle on this road. This was Saturday morning until Monday evening to take people to the weekly market in Saclopia. And so I said, there's this woman that could speak, mostly people were speaking the tribal dialect and of Mon. And I had a little bit of Mon, but I had a concussion and that Mon was gone. And so anyway, this woman that could speak Liberian English, it's like, let me go and I'll come back with a car from NCRDP. And she told them, I said, I will come back. And it was kind of a gamble on their part, so she had them let me go. And she said to me, go come, kind of Liberian English. And so I left, and so I'm driving back on my vehicle, and I'll kind of get into some things where I think I had that kind of shock where you're in super strength. But anyway, so I'm going back, and I have to go through a checkpoint. And the police officers there was ones that arrested me twice before. So I wasn't going to stop. I knew that I'd get through there, but I wasn't going to stop because it would just be time, and didn't have the time for that.
Yeah.
And, to get all the harassment and everything. So there's this walkway in between. So there's this part of the road that has like a rubber barrier going across it, where diplomatic immunity cars would go. And then there's this kind of this shack here, which is like the checkpoint part, where like the police and the soldier would be. And then there would be another where the, like the money buses, where the public transportation. So that deputy police officer could see that I wasn't going to stop, so he got in the middle of that walkway because he saw that was where I was going. Just almost big enough for my bike to get through. And so he stands in front of it, and he's blowing his whistle, and he has his hand like that, and he's putting his hand here on his pistol, like he was going to pull it out. I don't know. But I go through, he could see I wasn't stopping, and he dives out of the way kind of at the last minute, and I go through the thing. I get to my house, and there's a volunteer that had just gotten to the country or got out of training, and he's there, and I think I hit a kid. I think it's serious. I don't know. And I run over to the compound and do kind of the same thing. And they're so great. They give me this driver and this car. They don't give me, it's like Manny, who's this Liberian driver and also kind of technician. We go and we go back to where I hit him, and I guess they're kind of like walking him, trying to get him to the main road. It'd be miles away, but I don't think they thought I was coming back.
Yeah.
And anyway, we put him in the back of the truck with his mother and his grandmother, and the whole village is trying to get in the back, and it's like, no, only these two. And I didn't know that I was staggering. I didn't know that my eyes were glazed over. I didn't know that I stammered or whatever, my speech. And so,
sounds like you might have had a concussion.
I did. Yeah, I had a concussion. And anyway, we get to the missionary hospital, and we go in, and there's no doctors on duty or anything like that. But there's these two nurses, so we take them into the room, and they're pretty callous in my opinion, and so he's got an afro, and they have these they're called tiger razor blades, but they're really cheap in there, so his scalp's like flip back, but they're having to shave his head. They don't moisten it, they don't do anything, and they just go over with these dull things. He's just screaming, and Manny, the driver, who was so cool in this, he's like holding his arms down. I'm holding his legs down because it's like he's in so much pain, he's levitating. And anyway, and I actually tell off one of the nurses, but she had on shoes, and some of the blood from the boy got on one of her shoes, and she was complaining about that because she was going to go to a dance that night. I told her off.
Yeah.
And
good.
anyway, but Manny, would stick his head when I was doing the wrong thing, and but he was singing nursery rhymes. I think they were nursery rhymes, but at least childhood songs to this little boy Amon, and Hermano, excuse me, that was the language. And then we had to go find the father. Well, it wasn't the husband, it was the father, and so he had he has legal obligations over the son, or not obligations, but it's his property, and so we had to go find the father. And so we find the father, tell him the son's been in a serious wreck, and he doesn't even ask about the son's condition. He starts telling me about a business deal that he's going to be making, and with the settlement he's going to get from this. And so we're driving in a car to get back as quickly as we can. I mean, this is where Manny is really good. So, he's telling me about this business deal, and I just scream, stop. And Manny stops, and I turn back around and I say, get out of the car. And Manny kind of goes like that to me on my arm and shakes his head no and says, apologize.
Yeah.
So I did. I said, sorry about, what happened to your son and everything, and if you want to talk about the condition of your son, I've got all the time in the world for you. But if you talk about business deals, I have no time for you.
Yeah.
And anyway, so we get back there, and one of the things about Liberians is they didn't understand American sarcasm. Oh. And one of the things that I could do, that I felt, or not that I could do, that I discovered that I can vent a lot of my anger, like frustration and things like that, by saying something sarcastic that kind of vented that anger out, but without causing a big thing. So we're walking through, and like I said, is in American terms would be the illegitimate son, but he had more rights over the settlement than the wife would. Or not the wife, but the mother.
The mother.
And so, anyways, obviously didn't even recognize his son. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah.
So we were getting there, and I said, let me introduce you to your son. And
sarcasm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he didn't catch it, or at least he didn't acknowledge it. But anyway, so, we were taught, not to give any kind of money. I gave money to the mother and to the grandmother that we're with, from the standpoint that they could stay at the hospital and sleep over the weekend. I didn't have a lot, but I gave enough money that they could eat for the week.
Oh, absolutely.
And so anyway, that was the right thing to do. I have no question about that. But anyway, and I came back a week later, around the time he was getting released, and big bandage all over his head and everything, and he was terrified of me, as he should be, because number one, I was white, and it was kind of like this legend of the white bush monster, and then also that here's a guy that almost killed him. But anyway.
Yeah.
But it certainly had an effect on.
There was nothing more you could do at that point.
No, there obviously it went to court. I didn't even know that. I was kind of told after the fact. They got a pretty good settlement, probably. I heard it was like $575, something like that, which doesn't sound like much, but that's like 2 years worth of income. But I doubt if the mother and the grandmother got a cent of that. That's my opinion, but I don't know.
Where do you think the money came from?
Probably the U.S.
Peace Corps?
Yeah, probably. Well, actually, it would have been from the embassy, I'm sure, as opposed to the Peace Corps.
Oh, all right.
But I don't know. I didn't even know the court trial was going on until after the fact.
Huh.
And then I was told that, and I wasn't told that by the Peace Corps. I was told that by, I think, is either the Germans or actually the head Liberian with the German project. But there's always, I can't say a bright side to it, but I got to see a part of the culture that I normally wouldn't have seen, and I saw some humanity, like with Manny, with the mother, with the grandmother. The head Liberian with the project I didn't have a lot of respect for him, but I don't really know if my opinions were accurate. I kind of felt that he was a little bit corrupt. But I remember one time I saw him talking to an older woman, and then and I'm like with my counterpart, and we're in actually a different village. Well, anyway, he calls me over there, and I go over there, and he said, "This woman wants to compliment you on what you did." Yeah, and everything, and it's kind of like, it wasn't the kudos of it, but and even, I felt the humanity from him, that they recognized that I wouldn't have had to have done that. It would have been terrible if I hadn't done that. Don't get me wrong.
It would.
But,
yeah.
In their world, I wouldn't have had to have done that. In our world, we'd have had to have done that.
Right.
And I didn't, I didn't
Have
say
you
that.
had any further contact at all?
No, no.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
So, yeah.
No.
But anyway, so, that was certainly, that was a tough deal. But
No.
I think it affected me. Oh, I know it affected me. But, one of the things about the training is just all these types of things are going to happen to you. And you just have to deal with it and go on from there.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you had such good training, because who knows? You might have come apart at the seams.
Yeah. So, but it was, it was a great experience. The Peace Corps, and I had another.
Did you think about re-upping for another year?
Not with the Peace Corps. So, NCRDP one time talked to me about doing another year with them.
Oh.
And it
okay.
would have been through them. And I kind of thought initially it might be like an expat position, kind of like what they had with their German, expats.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed like it was more just kind of continuing me. I would have been with them, but continuing me kind of like with the way it was with the Peace Corps. But after the wreck, it's just, it's like, no, I'm going back. I'm going to finish my tour, but I'm going to go back.
Yeah.
So
You have no regrets about that at all.
Oh, no.
I take it.
No, I was never intending to be in the Foreign Service. I never intended to, being in international development beyond the Peace Corps.
Mm-hmm.
I was always going to come back to Oklahoma and try to work in a field that would help, better economy or better. It sounds really altruistic, but help society in some way, shape,
Sure,
or
I
form.
understand that. And you're in economic development now,
Yes.
aren't
Yeah.
you? In what way?
We help companies grow, and we help.
They don't know.
Excuse me, I work for the Tulsa Regional Chamber, so I'm Vice President of Economic Development. So I've been involved in all different aspects of economic development through the years, in terms of business attraction, business retention, and expansion. Right now I lead the business retention and expansion, working with existing businesses in the Tulsa region, helping them grow with expansions, with different issues that they may be facing, and also helping them grow the specific targeted industries that we have.
Sounds like might be a link there between what you did in Liberia.
Yeah, there certainly was. I mean, a little bit looser in Liberia, but it's certainly international development. But yeah, when I initially came back, I was working with people, I was in administration with an organization that served people with developmental disabilities. And so doing that, but then I found, I went back for my master's degree while working in that field of developmental disabilities, but then was able to get into economic development when I got my MBA.
Do you feel, Brien, that you've been instrumental in any way with recruiting anybody who eventually wound up in the Peace Corps?
Yes, but the reason why I laugh is I think some of the stories I told a lot of people, I don't know about you, but kind of think that they're horrific in terms of, like being arrested
Sure.
a couple of times, having guns pointed at you, being in a serious accident.
I didn't have that kind of experience, nor did I want it.
Yeah. So yes, I talked to people. Nobody had joined. one of the things that we felt, and I remember laughing with this woman, Margot, when I was really sick, was we were reading some of the descriptions of what life would be like as a Peace Corps volunteer in Liberia, and I was like, where's that at? And then Margot has this incredible New York accent, and she's also very funny and very boisterous, and it's like, why did they lie to us, and so I felt being very truthful, and so I would tell people what I experienced, and we were in a coup, and we lived in martial law, and there's all these things, and country crumbled, was crumbling during the process of it, and various things like that. And so nobody had joined, to my knowledge, but about a year ago, it's been about 2 years ago, somebody joined, and they're currently in the Peace Corps.
Ah. Now, when you say somebody, who was that?
So he was an Oklahoma State graduate, but he lived in Texas, but his aunt and uncle lived down the street from us. And so they'd known I was in the Peace Corps, and he was interested in joining the Peace Corps, so they linked us together.
Oh,
and he thought all my stories were great. It's like, I don't want that to happen. Everybody else was like, oh my God, I'm going the other way. But anyway, he's in Ghana right now. Not Ghana, Guyana.
Oh, Guyana.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Well, that gives you a kind of a special feeling, doesn't it?
Yeah. So my wife hates the stories, but she'll never watch this interview anyway. She's heard all these stories, but indirectly, I kind of met my wife from the standpoint of the Peace Corps, and so. And also, we've been married almost 34 years, and I say our marriage, and my wife really hates this part, our marriage was based on a lie. And but it wasn't a lie that either one of us told. So a really good friend of mine from high school, a woman, ran into her shortly after I got out of the Peace Corps. And so I was 27, 28, I guess I was 28 by the time I finally saw her, because I'd been back several months. And she thought I was too old to be single. Was trying to do everything that she could to get me fixed up with somebody, and I kept resisting. And it's like, no, not to meet somebody, not to get fixed up. And so my wife had a part-time job. She was a senior when I met her. She was a senior in college, or about to be a senior in college. Like right when the semester started, and. So this mutual friend thought that we would be perfect together.
Yeah.
And so was trying to get us fixed up, but we were both resisting getting fixed up. And so the lie was that she told me that she knew a woman that was interested in joining the Peace Corps and really wanted to talk to somebody that had recently been in it.
Yeah.
And then she told her the opposite of that there's this guy that just got out of the Peace Corps, would like to talk to somebody who's interested in going it.
Yeah.
So we both went into this kicking and screaming. But anyway, it'll be 34 years in July, and we dated for 3 years.
I have one more question, and
Sure.
that would be about: have you returned ever?
No, I would like to. I don't think that will ever be a possibility. It's just very expensive to get there, and I have a graduate assistant daughter right now in grad school, and one in college. If I went, it would be taking away from resources that could be a good family vacation for the family.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't want to go to Liberia. I don't really think Liberia would be a good family vacation.
All good reasons.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there was a couple questions you asked me last time that I thought were good questions that you didn't ask this time, and so one of them is that you asked that when you talk to a lot of the volunteers, that they talk about being transformed from their experience in the Peace Corps, and you asked me that, and I said no, and I kind of
You were one of the only ones that said no to that question.
Yeah. So, and I thought about it since then. And I think I took the question very literally in terms of transformed, like I came in a certain way in terms of what I would do with the rest of my life.
Uh-huh.
And I came out a different way, and like, I'm going to go into international development, or I'm going to do this. That wasn't the case. I mean, when I went in, it's like, I'm going to do something when I go back, and I'm going to go back to the States, and I'm going to do something most likely in Oklahoma, and something that, benefits society. So I don't feel that I was transformed in that standpoint.
Yes.
But I feel that I was transformed in a lot of other ways, from a standpoint of my thought processes and things like that. One of it was in the way that, I view our country, I view the United States. In Liberia, I learned a lot about the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
the things that I learned, a lot of them were good, a lot of them were bad. I learned that as a country, in terms of our mentality here, we're very egocentric, thinking that the world revolves around us.
Yes.
I don't think that it does. I mean, we're obviously, the biggest economic power in the world. We were more so when I was in the Peace Corps than we are now. But anyway, there's certainly that. I think that, we talk a lot about the political dysfunction right now that's going on in the country, and the arguing and everything like that. And it's certainly a lot worse than it was when I was in the Peace Corps. But I think the thing that we don't understand, that I feel that I learned in the Peace Corps, is that is a tremendous benefit and luxury that we have to be able to argue politically, and have different political beliefs, but still be under one structure, because we didn't see that in Liberia. And also the ability to have the time to do that is a luxury, because like in Liberia, it was pretty much just being able to get through the day and have enough food and to be able to live.
Right.
And here, it's a luxury to be able to have the time to sit back and intellectualize what's going on. A lot of countries don't have that. I mean, developed countries do, but the others don't. And so that's a big privilege.
Point.
And I talk a lot about, I had a lot of life-threatening illnesses in the Peace Corps. I don't think I was ever going to die, but I think people thought I was going to die. I know some people said that.
You look like hell, that's for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, like in high school, some high schools have like the most likely to succeed or whatever. I think if there were awards like that in the Peace Corps, I'd be like most likely to die or something. It's like, so there was certainly that, but that and the wreck and not quitting and the things that we learned in the training in Auburn that allowed me to have the strength to do that, I think that transformed me.
Yeah. No doubt.
Yeah, and I think I was. This sounds bizarre. It doesn't to me, but it would to other people. I think in a lot of ways I was very fortunate to have all that stuff happen to me. And I say that from a standpoint of, number one, how it helped transform me. I don't think I'm invincible, but I never think any one of these things will kill me. And I feel, and it developed a fighting spirit in me that I don't know that I would have had afterwards. And so, like, since I've been back from Liberia, I've had 3 episodes of cancer, stage 1, 2, and 4.
Wow.
I've had a bone marrow transplant.
Good
where
Lord.
And I don't know if you're aware, in a bone marrow transplant, they strip all your immune system. I developed a bacterial infection when I didn't have an immune system, and came close. I had a surgery one time for kidney stones, but I developed an infection and became septic twice in a 3-week time span. And I was told I could have almost died, but I never felt that way. And I fought. And I know I fought in all those cases. Mm-hmm. And I never thought I was going to die in any of those cases. Certainly, like phase 1 or stages 1 and 2, but like 4. I don't think my oncologist, I know she never thought I was going to die, but I think other people thought I might. But I fought and I kept positive during it. And I don't think if it wasn't for the Peace Corps, if it wasn't for those experiences, it wasn't for the resiliency that indirectly they taught us at Auburn, I don't think I could have done that.
Wow, that's quite something.
So
That's a powerful statement.
Yeah.
Really.
But I've really come to believe that.
That's a good one to end on, too.
Okay.